11:07, Dan Delmar in for Elias, just for today. Coming up later this hour, we're going to talk to that famous St. Leonard barber, Jesse Podulo of the Corner Shop Barber Shop. And don't need to say any more there if you understand what the controversy is. It's the name, the Corner Shop, of course. OQLF after them. We're also going to talk about Quebec banning phones in schools, but continuing to embrace esports. Is there a contradiction there? And this half hour, we're going to talk about high school stuff. And we'll talk to a teacher in a little bit about just this on-again, off-again budget cuts and whether or not we have enough money to support our schools come the fall. That is on the way. Let's actually talk about that right now. Marion Miller is a Montreal high school student. She's also an FAE member. That's the teachers union, and was delegate at their last Congress. Marion, hello.
Hi there.
First, in terms of the latest announcements, you know, for the public to see this, it seems crazy. Like their announcements sound crazy. Like just a few weeks ago, Dreville was saying, okay, guys, we're cutting $570 million, over $500 million of your budget. School starts in 3 months. Figure it out. Good luck. Obviously, a lot of pushback from teachers and the unions. And then all of a sudden they come up with not 570, but 540 million. So most of that funding will be in place for the fall. What's your take on this sort of cacophony of announcements and weird policy?
Well, like you said, it's totally crazy, and everyone at home is able to do the math and say, wait a minute, don't call this a reinvestment if you're only cutting 30,000 instead of cutting 570. Like there's still a 30 million gap there. And so it's not actually a reinvestment. We are still losing money for schools. And he specified, too, that this so-called reinvestment is only going to be for direct services to students, which is very important. We need a lot of student services, but it means that some of the other aspects in the school that I discussed with Elias last week, such as food programs and after-school activities, sports, infrastructure, technology infrastructure that needs to be updated, those things are still under attack from these compressions. And so they're not going to actually allow school boards and service centers to put money back there. They're only going to allow this 540 to go towards direct student services.
It's so crazy when you think about it. I mean, you could take a multinational, Marion, and it's Coca-Cola, and let's just say President Trump says, cut $500 million of your budget in the next quarter. Coca-Cola is going to go, no, I can't do that. That's impossible. And I don't know an entity, perhaps even a government around the world, who could cut that much that fast. What on earth? I mean, when we first saw that number, you must have been thinking, well, what does that mean? I mean, we'll have to close schools, obviously. Like, you have to make some pretty drastic decisions.
Major sacrifices. And I think it's shocking, especially because when he first announced that number, he even admitted himself, Dreville, that there's not all of this excess and this fat that needs to be cut. He's simply asking school boards to make compressions, which is absurd in a context where we know that schools in Montreal, their infrastructure is falling apart. We know that there's this staffing shortage. This is not a time to be making compressions. This is a time to be making actually major reinvestments in education. And what I worry about is, sure, we can invest in student services, but we know there's this reality of staffing shortages that touch those services, and we're just going to be further aggravating the situation and weakening the ecosystem of the whole school. So even if I'm able to hire a reading support specialist at my school, it's going to be really hard for her to do her job if the struggling reader hasn't had access to the breakfast program in the school, or his technology aid that he's supposed to use is out of date and can't be replaced because there's these other compressions. So it doesn't make sense to be weakening our school ecosystem. We need all of those pieces of the school to be fully funded for our students to be successful.
And it's worth noting that this is not new money again, right? So they're just filling the gap that already exists. So parents in the fall, should they expect more or less the same situation for this school year, or a few more cutbacks?
Well, there's a $30 million there that has to be disappearing from somewhere, and it seems like they are still asking school boards to compress in the other aspects that don't touch direct student services. So I think parents should be still alarmed and should be expecting their children's schools to feel the impact. And I really hope that parents will kind of remain aware of the situation and keep up that great pressure and mobilization from parents that I think forced the government to roll back on this decision so quickly. Like, that was really amazing to see those petitions circulate and parents getting out kind of in the street doing little rallies. I think that made the difference, and it's going to have to continue in the fall, because I'm not convinced that this will go away or that this will be enough, this kind of back and forth reinvestment.
If you were to receive an actual reinvestment in the education system, where would you put it first? Would it be in personnel and infrastructure?
I think a lot has to go in infrastructure. Schools are overcrowded, especially in the cities. You know, we have improper ventilation. We have a lot of classrooms that are just not up to date with what we need. So that has to happen so that we can start addressing the staffing shortages. Like, teachers and support workers don't want to work in a school that is crumbling. So I think those two things really go hand in hand. And we have to reinvest in our technology infrastructure, in the budgets that go towards pedagogical materials. Like, we shouldn't have to be begging and scrambling each year to say, please, can we get some new social study textbooks? This should be obvious that we want the best learning resources for our students in Quebec.
I haven't seen some stats lately, but in previous years, there were stats that suggested that private schools were educating students on a per-student basis, generally speaking, cheaper than the public system. And of course, in the private system, arguably, you'll often get a better quality of education. So what can we do to the public system to make those dollars go further?
Well, I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because so much of our public tax money is going to support that private system. So we as taxpayers are paying for the private system on top of what parents are already paying to send their kids to private school. So I think it's normal that they have a much greater bank of resources, and they've been able to keep their infrastructure up to date. So, you know, maybe it costs less per student because they haven't let their buildings crumble over such a long period of time. And our unions, a lot of the teachers' unions across Quebec would say part of the solution is actually reabsorbing a lot of those private schools into the public system and creating a truly public system where we're not, as taxpayers, financing private school. We're redistributing those resources amongst everybody to make all our schools better.
A quick question. I'm curious about your view on our next interview, because there's been a certain crackdown on screens in schools. Mm-hmm. Wondering what you think about that. But also, Quebec is still keeping its esports programs in place, which, of course, according to La Presse, keeps these esports quote-unquote athletes in the chair in front of a computer, and sometimes for up to 50 hours per week. So do you think there's a little discrepancy there? And do you think esports belong in schools?
I mean, my personal opinion is that most of our kind of specialized programs don't need to take up that much space in schools. I think a lot of even our sport études, art études, these kind of things belong more on the extracurricular side than during the actual school hours. And personally, I think that esports, it's a little bit absurd to have that much screen time at school during the school day. Mm-hmm. I agree that it does seem to contradict the new rules around screens.
Cell phones in classroom, I'm going to guess that you're probably pro, but would you ban cell phones throughout the entire day as well? Do you think that's going to go down well with students?
I think that it's been really hard for students coming back from COVID and facing social isolation, and I think cell phones have added a layer to that. So I'm really interested to see the public health studies seem to suggest that it would really be beneficial for their mental health to reduce access to cell phones in schools. I really am willing to see if that ends up playing out in that way. I think that it'll be good to try it, actually, and I think there's a place for a bit of cell phone use pedagogically, but the idea of keeping it mostly out of the school day, I think is a smart thing to try, and it is based on the science that's put out by the Public Health Research Institute. So I am excited to see how that pans out this fall.
Marion Miller, Montreal High School teacher and FAE member, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.